Hey, it's Patrick from J&P Cycles, and we're going to show you how to put S&S's 2-in-1 Super Straight exhaust on our Fat Bob here. And for most Milwaukee 8-powered Softails, this install is going to be exactly the same. Sans exhaust removal, yours may be a little bit different. Our bike has forward controls on it. If your bike has mid controls on it, the install is going to be the same, but we sell a kit to move your brake pedal over to clear the pipe. Now, right off the top, let's talk about fuel injection controllers. That's what everybody always asks. Am I going to need a fuel injection controller? And need is maybe a little bit of a stretch, but it is highly recommended, especially when changing this much of an airflow with the bike. As you can see, we have an intake on our bike, we have a mini teardrop on it, and now we're going to put this full exhaust on it, which is going to significantly increase the performance, but it's going to change the air curve of the bike, and it's very, very helpful to have something like an FP3 or a Power Vision to add that extra fuel to compensate for the extra airflow. And like I said, this is going to increase not only the sound of the bike, but the performance. S&S claims about just over 86 horsepower at the rear wheel from adding this pipe. In comparison to about the 75 horse this bike makes stock, that's a pretty good jump. And in addition to that horsepower, you're gonna go from just under 100 foot-pounds of torque to about 109 foot-pounds of torque. So definitely feel it in the seat of the pants with an intake and exhaust. The first thing we're gonna need to do is to start taking our stock exhaust off. We're gonna start with the mufflers. We're gonna take a 3/16 and pull out the screws that are holding them on the hanger in the back, a T27 to get these torques out, and a 9/16 to loosen up the clamp. I will say these top 3/16 can be a bit of a bear. You might have to get them started with a ball Allen. Let's get moving and we'll get our mufflers off here. This front Allen up here may be a little more difficult. You might have to use a ball Allen to get in there and break it loose. A nice little trick, you can stick this in there, just take a crescent wrench, put it down on there, and that's gonna give us some leverage to break those Allen bolts loose. Might have to give these a little wiggle. Okay, before we take the header off, we need to unplug our Oh2 sensors, which we are going to reuse. The rear one is plugged in right here behind the first bend here, and the front one is plugged in right here by the voltage regulator. Okay, now that we have the header off, we need to scavenge a few pieces off of it. We're gonna take out our Oh2 sensors and we're gonna reuse them in our new exhaust. We're also going to use our exhaust flanges and the clips holding them on. If you have a pair of snap ring pliers, you can get those off. Otherwise, a good old-fashioned flat-bladed screwdriver, trying to stab yourself in the hand. So we're gonna use a 14mm wrench and just pull these Oh2 sensors out. Okay, so now we're going to take a 5/16 Allen and take our exhaust mounting bracket off there. One thing about the stock bracket is it has our passenger peg mount on it. You can take this off before you take this bracket off if you want to, but basically you take the foot peg off. There's a T47 Torx down there, and you're gonna need one with some length on it. If you have something that goes to the end of a ratchet, it's probably gonna be long enough. So we're gonna pull that T47 out of here, and then on the frame, there's a little plastic plug. We're gonna pop that out, and we're gonna remount this passenger peg bracket to the frame right here. So while we're here, we're gonna put the peg back on, then we're gonna remove the used exhaust gaskets in there and install new ones. It's always a good idea to do that. You don't wanna do this whole installation and have an exhaust leak. Put your exhaust gasket in, make sure the flat side goes in towards the head and this tapered side is coming out of the motor. And then be careful not to kink them when you put them up in there. Make sure your surface is good and clean. So now we're gonna put our Oh2 sensors back in, and there are adapters that come in the kit. Now, if you're using a wideband system, you're gonna put the widebands right into the pipe. You won't need these adapters. But since we're putting our narrowband stock units back in, we're gonna take a 7/8 ratchet, put the adapters in, then put our Oh2 sensors back in with our 14mm. So now we're gonna put our flanges on. You just need to make sure you leave the little cutout in the flange facing up, and then put the snap ring over the top. Okay, so now we're gonna put our heat shields on. We're not gonna tighten them up. And when you put your clamps through, a couple of things to note. That you want them to be orientated so it's easy to get to them. So some are going to be facing kind of inside, some are gonna be facing outside. And we'll show you which way they should all be facing here in a second. But one other little nice thing, when you thread these through the heat shield, after you get them threaded through, it's nice to put a little bend on them with some needle nose pliers. And when you go to tighten them up, they go together a lot easier. now that we have the heat shields on, you can see how the clamps are orientated so we can do our final tightening sequence once the header's installed. But for now, we're going to go over to the bike and put the exhaust hanger bracket on with the 2 screws provided in the kit. We're gonna throw a little thread locker on these, take a 9/16 ratchet, and torque them from 30 to 45 foot-pounds. So now that the bracket's on, we're gonna put our header on. And we're gonna basically put the rear pipe in first, then kind of pull forward a little bit and put the front pipe in. Make sure that the exhaust is good and seated in the exhaust port, though, when you do that before you slide your flanges over. After that, we're gonna slide the flanges over and we're gonna run the flange nuts down, but we're not gonna tighten them up just yet. So now we're going to install our muffler. It's worth noting right now that we actually are using a 50-state compliant system from SNS, meaning there is a catalytic converter in this muffler, and you guys in California are all kinds of legal to use this, and SNS makes extremely good power with these systems, even though they are compliant. So that's a win-win. So we're going to take our torquer clamp, slide it over the top with our nut facing down so we can access it, slide our muffler on, put our dog bone in there, start our 2 screws in the back to hold it there. And then we're gonna need a 3/16 to tighten them up later and go ahead and hit them with a little thread locker. After that, we're gonna slide our collector heat shield on, and it has these 2 tabs here, which if you have to flex them out a little bit, it's not the end of the world. Just don't do it too much because you don't want it to rattle. But you need just enough gap to slide these 2 heat shields into these tabs. And then when you put your clamp on here, make sure your fastener part is facing down so you can tighten that from the bottom. Okay, before we slide the muffler on, we're gonna put our torquer clamp on, and we're gonna make sure that this nut is facing down so we can access it once we get the muffler on. So I'm going to torque the torquer clamp to 42 foot-pounds, and then I'm gonna finish up tightening up our heat shield clamp here. Then I'll go back to the front. We're gonna tighten up our flange nuts, and then we'll tighten up the 2 nuts on our exhaust hanger here. And then lastly, we'll go through and tighten up all of our heat shield clamps that we had just previously finger tightened. Okay, now we need to plug our Oh2 sensors back in, and then we need to wipe our exhaust down before we start it. There you have it. It's a huge improvement over the sound of your stock pipe. And the extra power you're gonna get from the intake and the exhaust combination, you're definitely gonna feel in the seat of your pants. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop us a comment. Go work on those motorcycles.